The night I should have been choosing a dress for my son's wedding, I was staring at a text that read only, "You're not invited." 30 years of motherhood, erased in 6 words. So I vanished, disappeared to the sea, to grieve alone. But while I was gone, his perfect wedding crumbled into handcuffs, fraud charges, and betrayal deeper than I ever imagined. My name is Lillian. I'm a mother, a believer in small routines, someone who thought devotion would always be returned. For years, my world revolved around my son, until a single text broke it apart. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. A plate of food sat in front of me. Steam had stopped rising. I had been eating slowly, distracted, my thoughts drifting in and out of the day. The lamp above the table buzzed faintly. Its light fell in a soft circle across the wood. Shadows stretched long against the walls. It was an ordinary evening, nothing unusual. I remember the faint smell of onions in the air, the scrape of my fork on the plate. Then the phone lit up, a short vibration against the table. I looked down, expecting something simple. A reminder, a neighbor, maybe my sister checking in. Instead, it was from my son. "You're not invited to the wedding. Don't come." The words glowed back at me, plain, cold. No mom, no kindness to soften the blow, not even punctuation beyond the final stop. I read it twice, then a third time. I thought maybe I had misread, that my eyes were tired, that the words had shifted on the screen. But no, it was clear. 6 words, nothing more. The fork slipped from my fingers and landed on the plate with a dull sound. I pressed the phone down flat against the table, as if that would change what I had seen. I sat still for a moment, breathing slowly. My heart had picked up. My hand trembled a little. I spoke out loud, barely more than a whisper. "Not invited?" The sound of my own voice startled me. The words seemed strange in the air, like they didn't belong in this room, in this life. The clock ticked above the fridge, steady, uncaring. I lifted the phone again, staring at the message. No other texts above it, no explanation waiting below, just that one message, standing alone. I typed back one word. Why? The letters looked small on the screen. I hit send. The phone chimed softly. The word shifted to delivered, and then nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. I refreshed the screen. Still nothing. The kitchen seemed to close in. The walls, the faint hum of the lamp, the smell of food I no longer wanted. I pushed the plate aside and held the phone in both hands. I thought of calling him. My thumb hovered over the button, but I stopped. If he had wanted me to call, he would have left room for it. He hadn't. I sat back in the chair. My breath felt shallow. The clock ticked on. A memory came, uninvited. My son, Daniel, when he was about 7, he had just come home from school. His shoes untied, his hair sticking out. He had drawn something in class and wanted me to see it. He held the paper out proudly. A picture of a house, a sun, a small figure standing in front with big round eyes. "That's me," he said, pointing. "And that's you." The figure of me was tall, smiling, standing right next to him. "You'll be there," he had said. "Always there, right?" I had nodded. I had meant it. Now, staring at the phone, I thought of that drawing. I wondered if he still remembered it. The phone buzzed again. My body jumped. I grabbed it fast. The screen lit up. Not him. A message from a store. An advertisement. My hand shook with anger as I tossed the phone back on the table. The sharp clatter echoed through the quiet room. I rubbed my eyes. I tried to steady myself. I thought of the wedding. I had been waiting for it for months. I had a dress picked out. I had pictured the moment, seeing my son standing there, nervous but proud. I had imagined the smile he would give when he spotted me in the crowd. Now, all of that broke apart in my mind, like glass falling from a shelf. I stood up, pushing the chair back harder than I meant to. The legs screeched against the floor. I began to pace the room. My hands kept clenching and unclenching. I didn't cry, not yet. The shock was too sharp, the wound too fresh. I sat again, pulling the phone close. I stared at the word delivered. No dots, no typing, just silence. The anger came next. How dare he? How dare my own son cut me out of his life in this way? By text? I had given him everything. Years of sacrifice. Nights spent awake, holding him when he was sick. Days spent working, stretching paychecks, making sure he never went without. And this was the thanks? 6 words that tore me out of the story of his life. I gritted my teeth. I thought of sending another message. Long, demanding, angry. But something in me held back. If I poured my anger into words, he might never respond. He might block me. Then the silence would be complete. So I sat, still, breathing hard. The house felt larger than it had minutes before. Empty. Hollow. I walked through it slowly, carrying the phone. My footsteps echoed faintly. In the living room, the couch sat neatly, a blanket folded across the arm, the TV dark. I looked at the family photos on the wall. Daniel as a baby, his first day of school, his graduation, all smiling, all hopeful. I stopped in front of one photo in particular, him at 12, standing in the backyard with a baseball glove, looking straight at the camera, grinning wide. I reached out and touched the frame. The phone buzzed again. My hand froze. I looked down. Still not him. Another meaningless alert. I placed the phone face down on the counter. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The evening stretched on. I didn't touch my dinner again. I washed the plate just to have something to do, the water running hot, steam rising. My hands moved on their own, scrubbing, rinsing, drying. The phone stayed on the counter, silent. I checked it once more before bed. Nothing. In the dark, lying under the covers, I held the phone against my chest, hoping to feel the buzz of a reply, hoping for even one word. It never came. I woke to light spilling across the room. The phone lay beside me. I grabbed it quickly, heart racing. Still nothing. No reply. The silence now felt deliberate, like a door shut firmly in my face. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The words replayed in my mind again and again. "You're not invited to the wedding. Don't come." I whispered them aloud, as though testing them, as though they might sound different in the morning light. They didn't. Later that day, my neighbor knocked. She wanted to return a dish I had lent her. I opened the door, smiled weakly, took it. "You all right?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, just tired." She didn't press. She gave me a kind smile and walked away. I shut the door and leaned against it. My throat tightened. That was the first moment I felt tears push forward. Not because of her question, but because I couldn't answer it honestly. I thought about calling my sister. She had been excited about the wedding too. She would want to know. But the shame pressed heavy. How could I say it? How could I admit that my own son had cut me out? So I stayed silent. The phone remained quiet. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, walked through the house again. Anything to keep moving. But at every turn, the thought returned. My son had sent that message. He had meant it. I was not wanted. When night came again, I sat at the table in the same chair. The lamp buzzed above. The clock ticked steady. The phone lay in front of me, Screen dark. I thought of typing another message. I opened the chat. I stared at the blank space. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. But what could I say? If I asked again, he might still ignore me. If I begged, he might harden more. If I grew angry, the gap might widen. So I set the phone down. I folded my hands, and for the first time in 2 days, I allowed myself to cry. The tears came slow, silent. They dropped onto the table, leaving small dark circles on the wood. I whispered once more, "Not invited," and let the words fade into the night. Daniel, my only child. I remember the weight of him even before he was born. 9 months of carrying him. My back ached, my ankles swelled, and every night I lay awake with one hand pressed against my stomach, feeling the small kicks that reminded me he was real. When he finally arrived, red-faced and crying, I thought I would break apart from love. His tiny fingers curled around mine, soft and strong all at once. I whispered his name again and again. Daniel. The nurses told me to rest, but I didn't. I couldn't. I stayed awake, watching him breathe in his small cot beside me. Every sound he made pulled my eyes open. I knew in that moment my life had changed forever. The first year blurred into nights without sleep. Daniel cried at 2, at 3, at 5 in the morning. I paced the floor with him pressed against my shoulder. My arms ached, but I didn't put him down. I hummed songs I half remembered from my own childhood. Some mornings, as the sun rose, I found myself sitting in the rocking chair with him still in my arms, his head heavy against my chest. The birds sang outside. My body begged for rest, but my heart refused to let go. There were moments I thought I couldn't go on, but then he'd open his eyes and look at me, wide and curious, and it was enough. His first steps came on a rainy afternoon. I had spread a blanket on the floor, his toys scattered across it. He let go of the couch and stumbled forward, arms out like wings. I gasped, clapped, and called his name. He made it 3 steps before tumbling into my lap laughing. I kissed his cheeks over and over, whispering, "You did it!" That night, I wrote it down in a small notebook where I kept every milestone. The first tooth, the first word, the first scraped knee. It wasn't just a record, it was proof of us. Proof that I had been there, always. When he started school, he clung to my hand at the gate. His backpack was too big for his small frame. "Don't go," he whispered, eyes wide. "I'll be here when you come out," I promised. And I was. Every single day. I waited outside the gates, no matter the weather. Sometimes I brought snacks, sometimes just a smile. He'd run out, waving his arms, shouting, "Mom!" That one word made everything worth it. Homework nights were long. He'd sit at the table, pencil tapping, sighing in frustration. I sat beside him, patient, guiding him through sums and spelling words. On weekends, I packed sandwiches and we went to the park. He ran across the grass, shouting with joy, and I sat on the bench watching, my chest swelling with pride. He was 15 when it happened. He came home quiet, his face pale. He dropped his bag by the door and walked straight to his room. I followed, knocking gently. "Daniel?" No answer. I opened the door. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. "She broke up with me," he muttered. I sat beside him, smoothing his hair back. "I'm sorry." "She said I was boring," he whispered, his voice breaking. I pulled him into my arms, his shoulders shaking. "You're not boring. You're my best boy." He didn't answer, but he clung to me, letting me hold the pieces of his heart until the worst of the pain passed. When he was 8, he said something I never forgot. We had been sitting on the floor, building a puzzle together. The room was warm, sunlight falling across the carpet. Out of nowhere, he looked at me and said, "You're my best friend, Mom." The words hit me so deeply, I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened. I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "And you're mine," I told him. I built my life around that sentence, around the belief that no matter what else changed, we would always be each other's safe place. There were sacrifices, always. I took on extra shifts when money was tight. I went without new clothes, without vacations, so he could have what he needed. When he wanted to play soccer, I saved for months to buy the uniform and cleats. I sat on the sidelines of every game, shouting his name, my voice hoarse by the end. When he wanted music lessons, I found the money somehow. I listened to every rough tune, clapping like it was a concert hall. Each choice was easy. Each sacrifice, small, compared to the joy of watching him grow. I believed in him, always. Even when he lied about small things, even when he failed a test, even when he stayed out too late and came home with excuses. I believed. I told myself he was good, kind, honest, because he was my son, because I had raised him. I held on to that belief the way some hold on to faith. It was unshakable. So when that text arrived, it wasn't only rejection. It was erasure, not just of me from his life, but of the years we had shared, the moments we had built, the devotion that had carried us both. It felt like the candle of my life's work had been snuffed out. Darkness where once there had been steady light. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. The phone stayed silent that whole night, and by morning the silence had turned into an answer of its own. I got up, made coffee, and stared at the steam rising from the cup. My body was awake, but my heart felt heavy, like it had stayed behind in the night. The text replayed in my head again and again. 6 words, sharp as glass. My chest ached each time I thought of them. So I opened my laptop and searched. Flights, rentals, somewhere away from the city, away from the walls that still echoed with his voice when he was younger. A seaside cottage appeared on the screen. White walls, wooden steps that led down to the sand, a window that looked out at the water. The pictures seemed calm, untouched by the noise of life. I booked it without thinking twice. I pulled the suitcase from the closet. It scraped against the floor as I dragged it out. I laid it open on the bed. The empty space inside stared back at me, waiting. I folded clothes, stacking them neatly. A sweater for the cool nights, sandals for the beach. I added a notebook, a pen, a book I had never finished. Each item I placed felt like a step away from my son, from the house that no longer felt like mine, from the life I had built around him. I hesitated over one thing, the framed photo on my nightstand. Daniel at his graduation, his arm around me, both of us smiling. I touched the frame, traced the outline of his face with my finger, then I set it back down. Too heavy to carry. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it shut. The sound was final, like a line being drawn. The morning air was cool as I stepped outside. The wheels of the suitcase clicked against the pavement. The neighbor across the street waved. She was watering her flowers. "Off somewhere?" she asked. "Just a trip," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, not asking more. I loaded the suitcase into the back of the taxi. The driver helped, then shut the trunk. I climbed into the back seat. As the car pulled away, I looked once at the house. The curtains drawn, the door closed, the quiet street. It looked ordinary, unchanged, but I knew I might not see it the same way again. The airport was busy, but inside me, everything stayed still. People hurried past, their voices blending into a low hum. I rolled my suitcase behind me, checked in, and sat at the gate. I watched other passengers, families with children, couples holding hands, business travelers with phones pressed to their ears. I sat alone, my ticket folded neatly in my lap. I thought of what my son might be doing at that same moment. Was he with his fiancée? Was he planning the wedding details? Did he feel lighter now that I was cut away? I tried not to imagine it, but the thoughts pushed in anyway. The boarding call came. I rose, walked down the tunnel, and stepped into the plane. As it lifted from the ground, I looked out the window. The city shrank below me, the streets becoming lines, the houses small shapes. It felt like watching a chapter close. The cottage sat at the edge of the water. The wood siding was faded by sun and salt, but it looked steady, welcoming. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of cedar and sea. The space was simple. A small kitchen, a living room with 2 chairs, a bed covered in a quilt. I set my suitcase down by the wall. For the first time in days, I exhaled fully. I walked to the window. The ocean stretched wide, endless blue, waves rolled in, steady and sure, each one rising and breaking with purpose. I opened the window and listened. The sound filled the room, softer than the silence I had left behind. The days began to fall into a rhythm. In the mornings, I walked barefoot along the sand. The tide washed over my feet, cool and firm, pulling at the edges of my steps. I watched seagulls dive, their wings catching the light. Afternoons, I cooked simple meals, fresh bread from the small shop nearby, fish caught by local boats. I ate at the small wooden table by the window, watching the horizon. In the evenings, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window again. The sun dropped low, painting the water with orange and red. I thought of him less during the day, more at night. The dark seemed to invite his memory back. The phone stayed on the table. I checked it each morning, half hoping, half dreading. No new messages from him. Once, late at night, I typed out a message. "I'm by the sea. I thought of you today." I stared at the words, but I couldn't send them. I deleted them instead. The phone stayed silent, as if it agreed with his decision. The village near the cottage was small. People nodded when I passed, their faces kind but not prying. The shopkeeper noticed me after a few visits. "You're staying at the cottage?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Good spot. Quiet. Healing." I only smiled. I didn't explain what I was healing from. At the pier, an old man sat mending nets. He looked up and said, "You here alone?" "Yes." He nodded, his hands still working. Sometimes alone is the best company. I thought about that for a long time after. At night, lying in the small bed, I listened to the ocean outside. Its rhythm was steady, like breathing. I thought of the word invited, how it had once meant joy, togetherness, welcome. Now it felt like a door closed firmly, a lock turned against me. I wondered if he would miss me when the wedding day came. Would he look into the crowd and notice the empty space where I should have been? Or would he forget me entirely, his eyes fixed only forward? The thought cut deep, but I forced myself to face it. If he wanted me gone, I would grant his wish. I would disappear. And maybe, in that disappearance, I would find something I had long forgotten, myself. The cottage stood close to the water, its walls faded white, the wood carrying the smell of salt. When I opened the windows, the sea rushed in, filling the rooms with the taste of wind and brine. It was a small place, a bed covered with a quilt, a chair by the window, a kitchen where pots clinked softly when I moved them. Simple, bare. Each morning began the same. I stepped outside with bare feet, the sand cool and damp under my skin. The tide had its own rhythm, always arriving, always leaving. I walked until the horizon blurred, then turned back. In the afternoons, I cooked for one. Bread, fish, vegetables from the shop in the village. The meals were plain, but the act of preparing them gave the hours shape. Evenings, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the wide window. The sun fell into the water slowly, the sky burning in colors that seemed too much for one pair of eyes to hold. The world darkened in silence, except for the steady rush of waves. But peace never came. Silence does not stay empty for long. It fills itself. It drags up what you tried to leave behind. At night, the ocean roared outside the cottage, but inside, the louder sound was the voice in my head. It asked the same thing again and again. Why? The word echoed in every corner. Why cut me out? Why so cruel? Why now, after all the years? I tried to answer myself, but the silence always swallowed the reply. On the third day, I walked farther than before, past the curve of the beach, where the rocks rose jagged and black. The tide foamed around them, white spray flying high into the air. I climbed one rock, sat down, and let the sea wind whip my hair across my face. I closed my eyes and listened. Behind the roar of water, I thought I heard him, Daniel, calling, "Mom!" the way he once did when he ran out of school, backpack bouncing. For a second, the sound was so sharp I almost turned to look. But when I opened my eyes, only the gulls circled, their cries harsh and empty. I carried a notebook with me, one I had packed without knowing why. At the cottage table, I opened it. The first page was blank. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I began to write, not about the present, but about the past. Short lines, quick sketches of memory. Daniel's first laugh. Daniel asleep on the sofa, his toy car clutched in one hand. Daniel at 16, shoulders slumped after failing his driving test. The notebook filled slowly, one page after another. Writing did not bring answers, but it gave form to the ache. It was a way of saying, this happened. I was there. Still, when I reached for the word why, the page stayed empty. The village was small, its streets narrow, the houses painted in soft colors. Each time I walked through, the same faces appeared. The shopkeeper asked if I liked the bread she sold. I nodded. The old man at the pier asked if I planned to stay long. I said, I don't know. Their voices were kind, but I kept mine short. I had no stories to share. One evening, as I paid for a bottle of wine, the shopkeeper leaned on the counter. "It's quiet here," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Quiet makes you think too much," she added with a knowing smile. I gave a small laugh, but inside I thought, she's right. The cottage grew heavy with dreams at night. Some nights, I dreamed of him as a boy, running barefoot through the house, his laughter ringing down the hall. Other nights, he was older, walking away, his back turned. I called out, but he didn't hear. I woke each time with my heart pounding, the sheets damp with sweat. The ocean outside kept rolling, indifferent to my restlessness. One evening, I sat on the porch with my notebook open across my knees. The sky was streaked with red. The waves hissed as they broke against the shore. I wrote the word in large letters across a blank page, "Why?" I stared at it until the sun dropped completely. The word looked strange alone on the paper, both small and enormous. I whispered it aloud, as though the sea might answer. but the waves only kept their rhythm. On the seventh day, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened, the air grew heavy, the waves slammed against the beach with a force that shook the cottage windows. I lit a candle, its flame flickering in the draft. The storm seemed to open something inside me. I remembered nights when Daniel was sick as a child, his forehead hot, his body trembling. I sat by his bed then, a candle on the table, waiting out the fever. I whispered stories to him in the dark, stories of nights and journeys, until his breathing eased. Now, years later, I sat alone in another storm, the candle flames struggling against the wind. The memory pressed hard, and again the question returned. Why? Why cast aside the person who had once been the shield against every storm? The storm passed by morning. The beach was littered with seaweed, shells, driftwood scattered like bones. I walked along the sand, picking up pieces. A small shell, pink inside. A smooth stone shaped like a heart. I held them in my palm. Small proofs of survival. At the edge of the water, I stood looking out at the horizon. The line where sea met sky seemed both near and unreachable. I thought, perhaps answers are like that horizon, always visible, never touched. The days at the cottage fell into a pattern, but inside me nothing settled. Each routine, the morning walk, the afternoon meal, the evening wine, was shattered by the same quiet ache. The question never left. It followed me across the sand, sat with me at the table, echoed in the crash of waves. Why? 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 And though no answer came, I knew I could not escape asking, because silence only sharpened the need to know. The days at the cottage had begun to blur together. Morning walks, afternoon meals, evenings with a glass of wine, and the sea stretched wide before me. The silence was heavy, but at least it was predictable. 3 days in, the phone rang. The sound cut through the stillness like a blade. I froze where I stood, wineglass in hand. The screen lit up. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, the sound filling the small room, echoing against the walls. When it stopped, the silence returned. I exhaled slowly, setting the glass down on the table. My hand shook, just enough to rattle the stem. Not an hour later, it rang again. Same number, same sharp sound. This time I picked it up, thumb hovering over the green button. But something inside me tightened, stopped me. I set the phone back down, watching the call fade to mist. I told myself it was nothing, a wrong number, some company trying to sell something. But the truth pressed at me. Wrong numbers don't call twice. The third time, it came just after sunset. The sky was darkening, the last light fading from the horizon. I had lit a single lamp, the cottage quiet except for the steady hiss of waves. The phone buzzed across the wooden table, the sound rattling against the glass I had left beside it. Again, unknown number. This time, I didn't even move. I sat frozen in the chair, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. Then it stopped. A moment later, the voicemail icon appeared. I waited a long time before pressing play. The voice that filled the room was calm, measured, official. Mrs. Harris, this is Detective Lewis. We need to speak with you regarding your son, Daniel. My hand jerked. The glass of wine nearly slipped from my fingers. I caught it just before it toppled, the dark liquid sloshing inside. I sat perfectly still, the phone resting flat on the table. The detective's words replayed in my head. Your son, Daniel. The ocean outside went on crashing, steady and blind to the shift inside me. The world tilted sideways. For days, my thoughts had circled only around one wound, his rejection. That cold text, the silence after, that was the ground I stood on, the grief I tried to live with. But now, the ground cracked open beneath me. A detective. A call about my son. My body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my palms damp, a tremor running through my legs. I pressed my hands flat against the table, grounding myself against the smooth wood. His face rose in my mind, unbidden. Daniel, as a boy, grinning through a missing tooth. Daniel at 20, walking across the graduation stage, his smile proud, his hand finding mine in the crowd. The detective's words tangled with those memories. "We need to speak with you regarding your son." The two versions of him collided, the child I had raised and the man who had shut me out. Which one was the detective calling about? I didn't call back. Not right away. I placed the phone face down on the table and stood. My body felt restless, too small for the room. I paced from one end of the cottage to the other, back and forth, my breath sharp. The question from before, the endless why, was replaced by a new one. What happened? I poured another glass of wine, but I didn't drink it. My hand was too unsteady. I sat by the window, staring at the dark horizon, waiting for courage to catch up to fear. The call changed the air of the cottage. The silence was no longer still. It was watchful, charged. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind against the windows made me turn. Sleep did not come. I lay in bed with the phone on the nightstand, screen dark, waiting for it to light up again. At some point, I drifted into a shallow doze, dreams blurred with fear, his voice calling for me, then fading into the roar of the sea. When I woke, the sky was pale and the phone remained silent. By morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it. I sat at the kitchen table, the notebook open beside me, the word why still written across one page. Now another word burned just as bright, detective. I picked up the phone with both hands, steadying myself. The number was saved now, marked by the voicemail. My thumb hovered over the button to return the call. For a long moment, I only listened to the waves outside, their rhythm steady, patient, as if the sea itself was waiting with me. Then I pressed the button. The detective's voice was steady on the line. Mine was not. I sat at the cottage table, phone pressed tight to my ear, my hand braced against the wood. The waves outside were loud, as though the sea itself leaned closer to listen. "Mrs. Harris," Detective Lewis said, "your son Daniel is currently in custody." The words hung in the air. For a moment they made no sense. Not custody, not Daniel. I waited for him to repeat it, sure I'd misheard, but he went on, voice flat, practiced. "He has been arrested on charges of fraud." Fraud. The word struck like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. Bit by bit, the detective laid it out. Bank accounts drained, investors tricked, documents forged. Daniel had built a house of cards, layer after layer, each lie balanced on the next. On the surface, it looked like success. A business thriving, a man about to marry, a future secure. But it was all air. The so-called wedding, not a celebration, a performance, a cover for one last scheme. Invitations had gone out, money had been collected, promises made. But just days before the vows, the structure buckled. Someone talked. Papers were uncovered. The illusion collapsed. And the bride, sweet, smiling, the woman I had seen once in a photograph, was not just a fiancée. She was his partner. Not in love, but in crime. Together, they had woven the story. Together, they had planned the show. And together, they had been caught. I sat in the chair long after the call ended. The lamp glowed on the table, casting shadows across the notebook where the word why still stared back at me. I thought of the wedding cake I had once imagined. White frosting, layers stacked high, flowers pressed against the sides. I thought of laughter, music, the clink of glasses. Now, in my mind, the cake tilted in slow motion. The tears slid. The flowers scattered. The whole thing crumbled into pieces across the floor. That was his wedding, not joy. Collapse. Shock has a way of rooting itself in the body. My hands felt numb, tingling. My throat was dry, though I hadn't spoken in minutes. My legs refused to move, as though standing might make the truth heavier. I stared at the dark window, my reflection pale against the night. Behind me, the room looked smaller, like the walls had closed in. The sea roared outside, each wave breaking sharp against the shore. In my head, images collided. Daniel as a boy, holding my hand on his first day of school. Daniel at 12, laughing as he rode his bike down the street. Daniel at 18, tossing his cap in the air at graduation. And now, Daniel in handcuffs. Daniel behind a table in an interrogation room. Daniel's name written on a police file. The two versions did not match. They fought inside me, leaving me torn. Who had I raised? Who had I loved all these years? I replayed the detective's voice, calm, matter of fact, carrying none of the weight that pressed down on me. This isn't the first complaint, Mrs. Harris. There's a trail. He's been clever, but careless. We'll need to ask you some questions. Questions. Always questions. But I had my own. Had he thought of me when he lied, when he stole, when he wrote that message, "You're not invited"? Had it been protection or cruelty? Did he believe cutting me out would spare me or only silence me? The detective didn't answer those. He couldn't. I thought again of her, the woman who was supposed to be my son's bride. I had studied her photo once, her arm around him, her smile bright. I had wondered what she was like, if she was kind, if she would make him happy. Now I saw her differently. A partner, yes, but not in the way I had imagined, not in vows or a future. A partner in deceit. Had she whispered plans to him in the dark? Had they laughed together at the people they fooled? The thought made me shiver. The cottage felt different now. The silence was no longer heavy with memory. It was sharp, cracking. I heard it in every corner. Collapse. The illusion of the wedding. The illusion of success. The illusion of the son I thought I knew. All of it falling, one piece at a time, until only rubble remained. The sound was inside me too, a breaking that felt both sudden and long in the making. Before, my question had been simple. Why reject me? Why push me out? Now it shifted. How? How had he become this? How had the boy who once pressed his small hand into mine grown into a man who built lies and sold them as truth? How much of him had I never seen? I stepped outside, the phone still in my hand. The night air was cold, the wind sharp with salt. The ocean spread wide before me, dark and endless. Waves crashed hard against the shore, spraying white foam into the air. I stood barefoot in the sand, the cold biting my toes, and stared into the black water. The sea did not answer. It only roared, constant and ancient, unmoved by the collapse of one life. I whispered his name into the wind. Daniel. The sound was lost at once. Inside, the lamp flickered. The wineglass stood untouched. The notebook lay open, blank pages waiting. I thought of the candle metaphor I had clung to, the light of motherhood, snuffed out by rejection. Now it was not only a candle gone out, it was the whole house burned down. The walls blackened, the roof collapsed. All that remained was smoke, rising into the dark. I thought back to his message, "You're not invited." Those words had cut through me like a blade when I first read them. Cold, dismissive, cruel. But now, after the detective's call, another thought took root. Maybe it wasn't cruelty. Maybe it was his way of shielding me. keeping me away from the wreckage he knew was coming, keeping me out of the photographs, out of the headlines, out of the shame. Maybe in some twisted way, it was the last act of care he could manage. And yet, knowing that did not stitch the wound closed, because exclusion, no matter the reason, still bleeds. I looked at the phone again, scrolling back to the message. 6 words, black against the white screen. I ran my thumb across them as though touch could change their meaning, but they remained the same. I imagined him typing them, his fingers flying over the screen, his face tight maybe, or maybe calm. Did he hesitate before pressing send? Or was it quick, thoughtless, a task to be done before moving on? I would never know. The thought turned over and over in my mind. Protection or rejection, 2 sides of the same coin. If he had wanted to protect me, he had chosen a cruel method. No explanation, no kindness, no word of love to soften the blow. If he had wanted to reject me, he had succeeded. The emptiness I felt proved it. Either way, I was outside, shut out of his circle, denied a seat at the table of his life. I walked through the cottage, noticing its smallness in a new way. The single bed, the single chair, the meals cooked for one. It mirrored my place in his life. Solitary, peripheral, cut away. The sea outside rolled on, but the rooms inside felt still, as though waiting for something that would not come. I touched the back of the wooden chair by the window. Its surface was smooth from years of use, yet empty now. How many empty chairs had there been in my story with him? Places where I had imagined myself only to find no seat was offered. I opened the notebook again. Pages filled with fragments of memory. His laughter, his first steps, the weight of his small body in my arms. Now I added a new page. At the top, I wrote the message, "You're not invited." Beneath it, I drew 2 columns. One labeled cruelty, the other care. Under cruelty, I wrote, "He wanted to erase me. He was ashamed of me. He didn't want me there." Under care, I wrote, "He wanted to spare me the sight of him in chains. He wanted me to avoid the shame. He thought this was protection." The page looked strange, like a balance sheet of pain, but writing it made the questions real, visible, instead of just circling in my head. Still, no side outweighed the other. Another thought came, darker. What if the shame was not only his? What if he wanted to spare me because I had failed him somehow? A mother's guilt is a deep well, and it fills quickly. I thought of all the times I might have missed a sign, the lies that seemed small, the excuses I brushed aside, the charm he used to smooth over rough edges. Had I been blind? Or had I chosen not to see? I pressed my pen against the page until the ink bled through. That night, I lit a candle. Its flame flickered in the draft from the window. I sat and let my mind wander to smaller memories, ones not tied to milestones or grand events. Daniel, age 5, curled on the couch, asleep with a picture book slipping from his hands. Daniel, age 10, stirring pancake batter, spilling flour across the counter, laughing as I tried to clean it. Daniel, age 17, leaning against the doorframe, asking if I thought he looked good before his first real date. Moments that seemed ordinary then, now shining with a sharpness I hadn't seen before.
I clung to them because they reminded me of the boy beneath the man, the thread of love that still tied us. I stepped outside again, the night air cold. The sea was restless, waves colliding against one another, foam rushing to the shore. I whispered the message aloud, "You're not invited." The wind carried the words away at once. Maybe that was how he wanted it. His message disappearing into the vastness, never explained, never answered. But the sea also carried my voice back to me in echoes, faint but present. And in that echo, I heard the question that would not let me go. Why shut me out when I had always been in? As the days passed, reflection became less about him and more about me. What had I built my life around? What had I given up in the name of devotion? And what remained now that his choices had torn the foundation apart? The cottage forced me to face these questions. Alone, there was no distraction, no role to play, no one to care for but myself. I looked in the mirror one morning and saw not just a mother, but a woman. Lines at the edges of my eyes, hair touched with gray, shoulders strong from years of carrying more than she thought she could. I had been defined by him, but without him, who was I? Still, the wound of exclusion did not close. Even if his message had been meant as protection, it had come to me as rejection. It had told me, you are not wanted. And no reasoning, no possible excuse could erase that truth. A mother may forgive, but forgetting is another matter. The words stayed lodged in me, sharp and unyielding. That night I sat again by the window, candle burning low beside me. The sea stretched wide, the horizon fading into darkness. I thought of him, my son in a cell, my son behind a locked door, my son who once called me his best friend. Maybe he had meant to protect me. Maybe he had meant to hurt me. Either way, I had been left outside. And though the world around me was calm, the sea, the sand, the quiet cottage, the storm inside me had not yet passed.
I searched myself for answers. Had I worked too many hours when he was small? Did I spoil him too much when he was a teenager? Was I too protective or not protective enough? The questions came in waves, unanswerable but insistent. I remembered long nights when Daniel was a baby, crying in the dark. I would hold him against my chest, whispering promises. I'm here. I'll always be here. But there were days I was tired, too tired, when I would place him back in the crib and let him cry a little longer than I should have. Did those moments plant something? Did they tell him I wasn't enough? I remembered rushing from work, still in my uniform, just to catch the end of his school play. He scanned the crowd, his eyes lighting when he saw me. I was proud, but guilt tugged even then. I had missed the beginning. Did that absence grow in him, unspoken but lasting? As he grew older, the lies began small. I'm at Jake's house, he'd say, when I later learned he had been at the mall. I finished my homework, though his books lay untouched in his room. I told myself it was rebellion, a phase. Teenagers lie, I thought. It passes. But maybe those were not phases. Maybe they were seeds, watered by my excuses, rooted deeper each time I let them slide. One summer, money disappeared from my purse. Not much. A few bills here, a 20 there. I asked him about it once. He looked me straight in the eye and said, I don't know, Mom. His voice was calm, convincing. I believed him. Or maybe I chose to believe him. That was the pattern. I see it now. Whenever doubt rose, I smothered it with love. When I saw the gaps, I filled them with trust. When I noticed the cracks, I painted over them with hope. I told myself, he's a good boy. He's just finding his way. He'll grow out of this. But did I mistake silence for growth? Did I confuse avoidance with patience? I chose love over suspicion. And maybe in doing so, I allowed the roots of something darker to spread unchecked. Now, every memory felt like evidence in a trial. Daniel, at 12, bragging about winning a game at school. Had he really won? Or had he bent the truth and I hadn't noticed? Daniel at 15, wearing a new jacket I didn't remember buying. He said a friend gave it to him. Did I ask questions? No. I only smiled and said it looked good on him. Daniel at 17, asking for money for books. I gave it without hesitation. Did he use it for books? I never checked. One by one, the memories lined up like witnesses, pointing not only at him, but at me. Was I blind, or was I unwilling to see? Mothers are told to believe in their children, to hold them up, to see the best in them. But what happens when that belief turns into blindness? When love becomes a shield that hides the truth? I had wanted to see only the good. The boy who called me his best friend. The boy who kissed my cheek before school. The boy who promised, "I'll take care of you one day, Mom." And I held on to that image, even as cracks formed around it. I looked at myself in the mirror of the cottage bathroom. The face that stared back was older than I remembered. Lines carved deep around my mouth, shadows under my eyes. I pressed my hands against the sink and whispered, "What did I miss?"
The woman in the mirror had no answer. She only looked back, silent, carrying the same guilt I felt pressing on my chest. The silence of the cottage was heavy. It amplified my thoughts, made them louder. I tried to drown them out with small tasks, washing dishes, folding clothes, sweeping sand from the floor. But guilt followed me from room to room. I imagined Daniel sitting across from me at the table, older now, hardened, his eyes no longer the boy's eyes I remembered. Would he blame me? Would he say, "You should have seen it, you should have stopped me"? And if he did, what could I say? One memory kept coming back. Daniel at 8 years old, coming home from school with a note from his teacher. He had been caught lying about homework. The teacher had written, "Daniel is bright, but he takes shortcuts. Please guide him." I signed the note, scolded him lightly, and hugged him afterward. I told him, "You're smart, sweetheart. Just try harder." But did I guide him? Did I really take it seriously? Or did I treat it as small, as something he would grow out of? Maybe that was the turning point. Maybe the warning had been there all along and I had smoothed it over with affection instead of action. Love is supposed to be a gift, but love without boundaries can be a trap. I gave him trust freely, over and over, even when it was not earned. And in that gift, I may have taught him the wrong lesson, that lies carry no weight, that trust is endless, that consequences can always be softened by forgiveness. It hurts to admit that, to think that my devotion, meant to protect him, may have been the soil where his deceit grew strong. I walked to the shore that evening, the tide low, the sand wet beneath my feet.
The waves whispered against the beach, retreating and returning, retreating and returning. I thought of our years together as waves too, coming close, pulling away. Moments of closeness, moments of distance, always moving, never still. But now I wondered if I had misread the tide, if I had believed the water would always return, no matter how far it went out. What if, one day, it didn't? Standing there, staring at the horizon, one thought pressed hardest of all. Had I failed him? Not as a mother who loved, because I had loved fully, without hesitation, but as a mother who saw, who guided, who questioned. Had my love blinded me to the truth until it was too late? The waves crashed harder, as though answering, but their answer was only sound, not words. And so the guilt stayed, echoing inside me, as endless as the sea.
They let me see him once. The room was gray, washed in fluorescent light. The air smelled of disinfectant, sharp and sterile. Chairs scraped against the floor as other families settled into their own corners, waiting for a glimpse of their sons, brothers, husbands. I was led to a booth. Thick glass divided us, smudged with fingerprints. A phone receiver hung on each side, the cord twisted from use. My heart pounded as I sat. I hadn't seen his face since the text, since the collapse.
since the handcuffs. And then, he was there. Daniel walked in, escorted by a guard. His hands were cuffed, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. For a moment, I saw not the man he had become, but the boy I once carried on my hip, the boy who ran into my arms after school. But the glass between us reminded me that boy was gone. He sat down, lifted the receiver, and looked at me. His eyes were calm, too calm. He didn't cry. His face was steady, almost blank, as though he had rehearsed for this moment, practiced, hiding what might slip through. I waited for the apology I longed for. The words, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for this to happen." But they never came. Instead, he leaned closer to the glass, his voice low, just above a whisper. "You're not invited to the wedding." It hadn't been about rejection, not entirely. It had been about shielding, about control, about his choice to keep me from the sight of him falling apart. I gripped the receiver tighter, my knuckles white against the plastic. 1,000 questions clawed at my throat. Why, Daniel? How did it start? Did you ever plan to stop? Did you think of me when you lied? Did you remember the boy who once called me his best friend? But none of those questions made it past my lips. My throat ached with them. My chest burned with them. But all that came out was silence. I found myself saying only one word. Understood. It was not agreement. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. A single syllable that carried more weight than a speech could. Understood. I heard you. I see the choice you made. I feel the wound it left. The word echoed in my own ears, softer each time, as if the room itself repeated it back to me. Understood. For a moment, his eyes softened. Just a flicker. A flash of something familiar, something human, something that looked like the boy I remembered. But then it was gone. His face hardened again, the mask slipping back into place. He leaned back in his chair, the cuffs glinting in the light. He did not speak again. The visit was timed. A clock ticked above the door, marking each second with precision. I wanted time to slow, to stretch, to give me more of him. But it moved on, steady and unyielding. When the guard approached, Daniel stood. He did not look back. The glass separated us to the end. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt harsh. The air smelled different, less sterile, but no less heavy. I carried his words with me. I didn't want you to see this, and I carried my own in return. Understood. The repetition followed me down the steps, into the street, into the silence of the car. Understood. 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 But understanding did not mean peace. It meant only that the truth was now mine to hold. That night I sat in the cottage again, candle burning low. I thought of the glass between us. How many times had glass separated us without me noticing? The glass of lies, the glass of charm, the glass of silence. He had been just out of reach for years, and I had mistaken closeness for connection. Now the glass was literal, thick, cold, impossible to break, and still I pressed my hand against it as though touch might travel through. I whispered the word once more into the empty room. Understood. This time, it was not for him. It was for me. Understood that love does not erase betrayal. Understood that shielding can wound as deeply as rejection. Understood that sometimes a mother can only watch as her child chooses a path she cannot follow. The candle flickered, its flame unsteady, but it held. And so did I. The trial stretched on for months. Headlines filled the papers. His name appeared on screens. His face, once a smile in family albums, now stared out beneath harsh lights, beside words like fraud and conspiracy. I did not attend every day. I couldn't. The weight of the courtroom was too heavy, the air too thick. But I went often enough to see how quickly illusions crumble when the truth is dragged into the open. The woman, who had once been introduced as his fiancée, the partner I had pictured welcoming into our family, sat on the other side of the courtroom. When the pressure rose, she turned. Her words were sharp, deliberate, crafted to protect herself. She painted him as the mastermind, the driving force. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but the betrayal in her voice cut him down piece by piece. I watched him lower his head as she spoke. For the first time, I saw defeat settle across his shoulders. One by one, others followed. Business partners, former friends, associates who had once shaken his hand now raised theirs in oath, swearing to tell the truth. Their stories matched in pieces, money missing, promises broken, contracts that never existed. Each testimony built the case brick by brick, and with every brick, the wall between us grew higher. I sat in the gallery, my hands folded tight in my lap, and listened, not only to their words, but to the silence that followed each revelation. A silence that seemed to say, "This is who he became." When the verdict came, the courtroom was still. Guilty, the word echoed, final and absolute. He was sentenced to years behind bars. Time measured not in days of freedom, but in the counting of locks, in the turning of keys. I watched as he was led away. He did not look for me this time. He did not search the crowd for his mother's face. And I let him go. When I returned home, silence greeted me. Not the heavy silence of shock, not the suffocating silence of grief. This was different. It was the silence of an empty home, a son behind bars, a mother left alone with her memories. But there was something else too. This silence did not only wound, it also asked something of me. It asked me to breathe. It asked me to live. I walked through the rooms of my house. The kitchen where I had once set 2 plates, now set for 1. The hallway lined with photographs. His school picture with a crooked tie, his graduation cap, his smile beside mine. Each frame was both comfort and ache. Proof that he had been mine. Proof that time had moved on. I dusted the frames, straightened them on the wall. For the first time, I did not rush past them in pain. I let myself look. I let myself remember. The memories still hurt, but they did not crush me. I thought of his small hand in mine, his laugh spilling through the house, his voice calling me best friend. Those things were true once. They mattered once. And nothing, not even prison, not even betrayal, could erase that. Memory did not have to be only trial evidence. It could also be a balm. I opened the notebook in the cottage one last time. Pages filled with questions, with guilt, with fragments of love. On the final page, I wrote a single sentence. I cannot change him, but I can choose myself. I closed the cover and placed it on the shelf. It did not feel like abandonment. It felt like setting something down that had been too heavy to carry alone. Days passed. The silence became less of an enemy. It became space. I filled it with small things. Walking in the mornings, feeling the sun on my face, cooking meals slowly, savoring the taste instead of rushing, reading books that had sat untouched for years. Each act was small, but each was mine. For so long I had lived inside his shadow. Now, with that shadow gone, I saw my own outline more clearly. I returned to the shore. The waves stretched out, endless and steady. I stood, with the tide brushing my feet, and whispered his name. This time, I did not ask questions. I did not plead for answers. I simply said his name, and then I breathed. The ocean roared back, not in judgment, not in comfort, just in its own rhythm, and I let it carry me forward. The trial had ended. The sentence was written. His path and mine had diverged in ways I could never mend, but the silence left behind was not empty. It was full of possibility. A son behind bars, a mother learning to live, a life not erased, but reshaped. And in that silence, at last, I heard something new. Hope. I still walk the shore, the same stretch of sand that once carried my questions, my grief, my guilt. The waves move as they always have, retreating and returning, retreating and returning. Their rhythm is steady, almost comforting. Time passes here in water and wind, and I pass with it. I still pour my glass of wine at sunset. The horizon still burns into color before slipping into night, but something has changed in the ritual. It is no longer an escape. It is not a shield against pain. It is a pause, a reminder that endings and beginnings share the same sky. The glass in my hand feels lighter now. The silence around me no longer suffocates. What has carried me most is the writing. Each morning I sit at the table in the cottage with pen and notebook. I write down everything, not to condemn him, not to curse the choices he made, but to remember. I write the small memories, the pancakes, the scraped knees, the laughter that filled our house. I write the hard memories too, the lies, the missing money, the silence that grew between us. Every word on the page is an attempt to understand, to give shape to what feels shapeless, to hold it in my hands without letting it consume me. Maybe one day he'll read it. Maybe he'll sit across from me, older, worn by years, and turn the pages. Maybe he'll see that even when he pushed me away, I didn't abandon him. Maybe then he'll understand. Back at the house, I have begun to rebuild. I cleaned the rooms not as shrines to what was lost, but as spaces for what might still come. The walls no longer echo only his name, they hold mine as well. I hung curtains that catch the light in the mornings. I planted flowers in the garden. I set the table for one without sadness, because one can still be enough. For the first time in years, the home feels like mine. Neighbors sometimes stop by. They bring bread, fruit, small kindnesses. For a long time, I avoided them, fearing the weight of their questions, the pity in their eyes. Now, I open the door. I let them in. We sit together, drinking tea, talking of simple things, weather, gardens, books. They do not mention the trial. They do not mention my son, and I do not need them to. It is enough to share company, to let warmth return where silence once lived. Still, I dream sometimes of his return. I imagine him stepping out of those walls, older, changed. I imagine the sound of his footsteps approaching the door. I imagine opening it, seeing his face, and knowing whether time has healed or hardened him. I do not know what that day will bring, but I know I will be here, not waiting as I once did, not holding my life in pause, but living and ready. I remind myself often, I am still his mother, even after betrayal, even after collapse. Motherhood is not erased by handcuffs or headlines. It does not vanish in a courtroom. It changes, yes. It bends, it breaks, but it remains. Because that's what mothers do. They hold on, even when the grip is different than they once imagined. Some mornings I walk the shore before sunrise. The air is cold, the sand damp beneath my feet. The sky shifts slowly from black to blue, then to gold. I stand with the waves brushing against my ankles and watch the first light stretch across the water. And in that moment, I feel both small and infinite, a silhouette against the vastness, carrying sorrow and strength in equal measure. The ocean does not judge. It does not erase. It simply moves forward, again and again. So do I.